Dan Acker. I'm from the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I believe this is my 5th year doing this with you guys. Some of you I've seen your faces a number of times, some are new. So I'm going to move this down a little bit more so we're not getting quite the feedback. Is that better? I tend to have a loud voice, so it kind of picks up. Can people all hear me? Yeah? All right. Okay, so I want to first off walk you through your booklet just so you know what's there, and I'll try to stay away from things that make that happen. They're not in the order that we're going to play with these, but we'll just talk about them. The first sheet, later this afternoon, or probably we're going to actually break down into some small groups. I don't know how that. And I've got big sheets, but we're going to sit down and we're going to kind of look and say, if I've got certain behaviors. So we know we have some behaviors that kids do to gain something. We have some things kids do to get away or to avoid or escape things. So we're going to identify what some of those behaviors are. We're going to identify what we think they're trying to gain or what we think they're trying to escape. And then we're going to say, okay, based on the various behaviors, what kinds of interventions might you do proactively as antecedent interventions? What kind of interventions might you think about doing reactively? So the kid has done this, now what are you going to do? And we're going to try to just develop sort of a menu or kind of a cheat sheet for you as you're thinking about kids and thinking about the function. Because one of the things, and I assume you still experience it, when I go into schools, teachers are still saying, I've got a kid who hits, what do I do? Well, it's not what they're doing, it's why they're doing it. I can build a better intervention if you tell me I've got a kid who's doing something for peer attention. I don't even have to know what the behavior is. I can build you a better intervention knowing that than if you tell me what the behavior is. So we'll spend some time just kind of playing with that. We're going to do that a little bit later. The second set of forms that you have, I want to kill trees, right, like everybody else. We've got just some papers here. We've got a kind of a sample flow chart for looking at this whole idea of going through a 3-tiered model in terms of response to intervention or positive behavioral interventions. And then there's a series of sheets afterwards. We'll talk about these more in detail as we go through some different activities, different structures and game activities to set up structures. The next set is a vignette. This is what we're going to start with today after we kind of do a brief introduction. And we're going to look at Amy, and we're going to look at Amy's data, and we're going to try to figure out what the function of Amy's behavior is. And then we're going to develop a behavior intervention plan for Amy. So it's just to give you some more practice in looking at data. You might find that a piece of data actually triggers the need to have more data. It brings up more questions than it does answers. And so we'll have you try to identify, if that's the case, what more data would you like to get and how would you get it? How would you actually set about doing that? And then we'll try to develop a plan for Amy. The next set of documents after the next yellow sheet is actually a copy of the PowerPoint we're going to play with, so you can look at that. And following that are some sheets that we will probably be using as you're going through Amy's material. You might want to use some of these to look at to help you figure out what's going on. And we'll talk about those as we go through. So that just kind of explains the book. You may want to turn to the PowerPoint and know what's going on there. And if anybody else needs another book, I just stole that so I could walk you through it. I want to start by just finding out, again, you've spent a day, you're taking a day off of work. Maybe you just wanted to, we know that Sherry has a good breakfast and good lunch. Maybe that's all that you wanted to come for, but maybe you just want a day away from the kids. Who knows, all right? But if you spent a day to come here, what were you hoping you'd get today? What are the issues as you're looking at the behavior of the students that you're working with? What are the issues you really find kind of pressing on you right now that you'd like to talk about? Because obviously, I want this to work for you. Any issues people are hoping we talk about? Anything coming to mind? Anybody care? Okay. All right, well, I think I can please you guys. Okay, this is not going to be a hard crowd. Okay, good. All right, I wanted to just kind of go through a little bit of review. Some of you have been through this, but again, some of the people are new here, so we'll just start off. I know each and every one of you have seen this 3-tiered model for PBIS and for behavior interventions. And the idea of having, do I have good, solid rules, expectations? Do I have good instruction going on? Now, how many of you, when you go into a classroom, you've got a student who's got behavior problems, find that you do not have clear rules? Find that you do not have good instruction going on? And that one of the big problems that goes right from the beginning is that some of this very basic stuff that you have to have if you're going to even set a base for kids, really isn't in place. Now, one of the things we were talking a little bit before the session started, one of the beauties for me of a functional behavioral assessment is that not only can we look at teacher behavior, we have to look at teacher behavior. We have to look at those structures because that sort of sets the social context within which behavior is going to occur. And so, quite frankly, most kids are not going to fail quietly. So if you've got me in a situation where instructionally I cannot be successful, and you expect me to sit quietly and do well, you're kidding yourself. So if you've got a teacher who's not providing instruction in a way that this student can benefit from it, and you don't address it, you can do almost anything you want to do on behavior, and the best you're going to do is suppress it. You're not going to truly change it. Okay? Yes?
Comment. We have administrators who say, you're there to observe. You go in and you say, this goes beyond just that individual child. You go down to the system that's going on in the classroom. And the administrators say to you, you're there to observe the child, not the teacher, not the class. You almost are, you don't know what to do at that point. It's frustrating.
I guess part of the issue, and we're going to talk later this afternoon. In fact, I'm kind of upset because I thought I had a slide in here that's not there, so I don't know what I'm going to do about that. But one of the big issues that we have to deal, oftentimes, if you're going to deal with behavior, those of us that are going to work with the teachers, work with the kids, have to become comfortable with conflict. Because we are asking people to change. And quite frankly, nobody likes change. Okay? So one of the issues may have to be even from the start, and I know this is always easier to say than, is that I can't do that. Behavior occurs in the context, and if you want me to, quite frankly, if I don't change the context, you will not change the behavior because the behavior works. The reason the kid is doing this in that environment is because it works. And if you say I'm going to go in there and change the kid and not change the context, you're kidding yourself. So you may have to be subtly doing some education of the administration, that's not going to happen. And if that's what you want, then I can tell you right now we can save a whole lot of time because there's no point in my going in here. It's not going to work. Now, the issue becomes how do we begin to change that context? And that's the kind of the touchier issue. Is most of us, feedback's only good if I can hear it. So if I've got a teacher who's part of the problem, when you give me that information, how do you deliver that in a way that I can hear it? Now, I know one of the things that I try to work very hard when I work with schools and school districts is that one of the first messages the administration I think has to get out is the fact that there is no way in the world, I don't care how good your teacher education program was, whatever's going on, that you are going to step in front of a classroom of 25 to 31 kids and have all the knowledge and skills to be able to meet each and every one of those individual kids' needs with no help or support. That is just not going to happen. And then the reality becomes, am I a teacher who's bright enough to know I can't reach this kid? I don't have the skills necessary and I need some help and support to do that. I know it's my job. I want to do my job, but I can't do it alone. So can we, right from the beginning, give teachers permission to not have to know everything? Because I think sometimes we get into this bind where I'm supposed to know this. And if I don't know it, it means I'm a bad teacher. So then I go and I talk to all my friends. I don't know how to reach Randy. All right, my friends give me some suggestions. I go try those. That doesn't work. By the time I usually bring a child up as part of an issue, I've already tried everything I'm comfortable trying, and quite honestly, there's almost a subtle stake on that teacher not having anything that team suggests work, because if it works, it means I wasn't any good. So we've got to find a way to open those doors much quicker and to let teachers know it's ludicrous to expect that. Okay? And so, and the other thing is that what you're doing, if I'm doing something that doesn't help, so I've got Damien here. Damien, right? I could be doing something that's detrimental to Damien that's fine for the student next to him. It's not like what I'm doing is bad for everybody, but I can do things that get in the way of certain kids learning. Now, the issue isn't that if I do something then to change that, I'm somehow taking away from the other students. I can probably think of ways that I can do something better for everyone. And it's a matter of again, just kind of broadening those toolboxes. But we have to become comfortable in talking about that with teachers. We've got to be comfortable and again, those of you that have been in my sessions before, one of the things that I find in functional assessments It is not for lack of effort. Teachers put a lot of work into some of these kids, but what they're doing will never change their behavior. They're feeding right into it. And so it's not because they're not trying, it's because they can't stand back and watch themselves teach. You go in as the observer and you kind of go, oh my God, why is she doing that, or why is he doing that? That is ridiculous. Well, it's easy when you're sitting back. It's not easy when you're in the alligator pit. So it's how do we begin to give that feedback to the teachers that allow them to get that kind of ability to see themselves from outside themselves. So we'll talk about some of that. And I think one of the things that FBAs and functional assessments allow you to do, if you do it right, is to actually set that stuff out for teachers. Now you've got to be comfortable with the conflict though, because you're always going to get, we were talking earlier, you always get the defensive teacher, right, who can't hear a thing. And sometimes those defensive teachers, once they leave you, will think about everything that was talked about and will ultimately change their behaviors. Others come back and that they didn't hear anything, right? And you have to keep charging that wall. But you're right, you're going to have an issue. If you've got an administrator who says, you can't talk about that, then I would be very frank and say, then I can't change the behavior. It's that simple. I used to do family therapy. And we'd have families that would be kind of like, you're not sick enough yet. Come back when you're sick enough that you want to do something about it. Because if everything's fine, then everything's fine. I can't make you change. Call me when it's not so fine. We'll see what we can do then, right? So anyhow, do I have those kind of issues? The next issue that I find that happens in this situation is that, do I have structures in that middle tier? So all of a sudden, let's say I've got kids who are doing things, let's say for adult attention. Do you ever have kids that do things for adult attention? Right? Is that a legitimate need? Sure. Okay. So I've got Carrie here, needs lots of adult attention. All right? Engages in all kinds of inappropriate behavior to get it. All right? That's why she sits in front. Okay? Although nobody sits really in front. Okay? She actually sat in front because she got here too late and didn't get the back seat. Right? Okay? She wants lots of adult attention. Now, that's a legitimate need. What structures do you have in your school to provide adult attention to kids who need it? Have you sat back and thought, here are some structures we have to have in place? Because if I wait until I've identified Carrie, then I'm going, okay, God, we got to think of something. Carrie's one student. That's not enough critical mass for most schools to generate a structure to help. Is Carrie the only student, though? No, but we always take them on one at a time. So it's always one kid, and it's not enough mass. But in reality, I've got 19 kids in this school that need additional ability to get adult attention. What structures do we have in place? I've got kids who they need to have some leadership and some ability to have some control over their life. What structures do I have in place? I need peer affiliation. Now, peer affiliation, that's probably one that we actually do have some structures usually in place. They don't always work, but we usually have something in place. But have we thought this through? Then you get that intensive kid. That's the one that we've developed the FBA for, right? And the BIP in this kind of situation. Those of you that have been in the sessions before, one of the big problems with FBAs and BIPs, if I am a parent lawyer and I'm going to go to a due process hearing, guess what the easiest thing for me as a lawyer, a parent lawyer, to win on in almost all the issues in schools? The FBA and the BIP. So, and quite frankly, I work with a lot of the different lawyers, and I'm on the school side, but I work with lawyers on both sides, I guess. What they'll do is, if you're a parent, so if this is a couple there, their child's having problems, I'll say, does your child have any behavior that interferes with their learning and the learning of others? How many kids don't have that? Right? Especially special needs kids, right? They all have that, okay? If they have that, what are you supposed to have? Behavior intervention plan. How are you supposed to develop that behavior intervention plan? You're supposed to have done a functional assessment of behavior to see how does that behavior work for the child, and that plan is supposed to address those functions. All right, so does your child have a behavior intervention plan? If not, guess what? I've already, in the cat seat, I'm going to win this. If they do, I'm going to say we're going to name that as an issue. And the reason we name it as an issue is because most times we do not do these adequately enough, or we don't implement them well enough. So oftentimes up there, it's not that the kid doesn't have a BIP, but if I go to the teachers and say, can you tell me what to do when Carrie does this? They can't tell me what the plan is. They're clearly not implementing it. All right? I'm involved right now in a due process that's a student in Wisconsin they want to expel. And part of the problem is that they didn't carry out the behavior intervention plan. So they didn't follow the IEP. So they're not going to be able to do that. All right? And it's just frosting the administration of that school big time, okay, in terms of what's going on. And so again, part of the issue is how do we begin to support our teachers in the implementation and giving them feedback in terms of what's going on. And we'll talk about that at the end of the session. One of the things, yes?
What if, let's say you have the student and you can keep control and you kind of work well with that student and there is no behavioral plan, I mean, behavioral, maybe you don't have the BIP, but then the next year you know that same thing, I mean, it might go south.
Mm-hmm. So under your structure, you know how to prepare and to prevent and all these kinds of things. Right. But the next teacher may not.
Right, and you're writing the IEP, and under me, I know that I can control, and I know what I'm doing. I don't, have it on paper necessarily, but I know what I'm doing. And yet, do you still make a BIP?
Well, this is one of those. There's what I have to do and what maybe I should do kind of a question. If I am doing lots, and I'm aware that I have to do a lot of antecedent preparation, things like that, in order for this child to be successful, then ethically I probably should have a behavior intervention plan where I spell that out so that it's clear, people do know what's going on, and that I can begin a couple of things. One is that I also want to inform the student what kind of, to the extent possible, and the age and all that, what kind of accommodations do you need to have to be successful? Because ultimately, I don't want to have a student who requires everybody else to change the world around them to make it work. I want a child who can have some ability to advocate for themselves. So I know I need these kinds of things to be successful. So part of it is, can you verbalize it enough to where you can communicate it to other teachers, but also can you communicate it to the student as the student gets to the point of being able to handle that? Because if you don't, all that knowledge is going to be lost when the child moves to the next teacher, and they're going to spend 3 months retrying to discover the wheel about what's going on, and the person who loses in that is the student. So from an ethical standpoint, I'd say yes, you probably should have a behavior intervention plan. From a legal standpoint, the kid doesn't have any behavior that's interfering with their learning of others. You probably couldn't get in trouble for not having it, but you really are doing an awful lot of intervention. That make sense? Yeah.
Question on that. First off, if you look at how we do our FDA and now we're starting to take data. Now, if you have 0 behaviors, and then on your BIP you have your data collection, and would you just say this is a maintenance of 0 behavior? I mean, it becomes, can't you just take that information and write it into your conference notes or something as to this is kind of environment?
You can, yeah, it may not be a formal behavior intervention plan. It may be part of the accommodations written in the but I might, if I know that, for example, if I've got a student who transitions are difficult, but if I give them a warning ahead of time, build this in, the child can handle the transition very nicely, okay? Now, that's obviously, it's an accommodation that we put in place. I might make it a little stronger than a typical accommodations, because one of the problems that we have is that some of you work in school districts, for example, that have the old check things for accommodations. They make me crazy, right? Because first of all, you go into a meeting, and you start going through that page, and most of the parents will go, well, my kid would do better with that, yeah, that, and that, and that, and yeah, and that, and pretty soon you've got 19 things checked, right? Which basically means not much of anything's going to really be implemented, okay? And it's like, it's not meant to would your kid do better with this. Hell, my kid graduated valedictorian. Would they have done better with that? Yes! Okay, every kid would do better with that. It's do they need it to be on an even playing field? But again, we don't like conflict. So when mom and dad say, well, I think he needs it, most of us aren't going to go, well, I don't think so. Let's talk about that. All right, so we just check it. So I would probably put that in maybe a little bit more special place and say, this child can have problems, with various behaviors. Here's what we find works very effectively to prevent those.
We just had a parent who said, spell that out for us. So that was the first. The team was shocked. They're used to just checking the boxes. And the parents saying, spell it out for me. When are you going to use that facing? For what reason are you using that facing? So they got called on the carpet, so they realized they had to do a better job.
Well, I'll go in two where you'll see, and I know I was in one due process where a team got hit on it, where people will put as needed. And what happens, again, is what they'll do is they'll bring each teacher in, and they'll say, how do you know when Randy needs this? How do you know when Randy needs this? And if you don't all give the same answer, you have lost. And if it's when the student asks for it, you will lose. Okay? Because again, if I'm 15 and I'm trying to look like I'm normal, am I going to ask you to come read the questions to me? You know, I might need it desperately, but I'm certainly not going to ask you for it. Okay? So, you know, so there are a lot of those kind of hidden minefields that we have out there, and unfortunately we tend to hit them the wrong way. Okay? Other questions, comments? All right, one of the things that I'm starting to work very diligently with schools is the fact that a three-tiered system in the school as a school-wide system is wonderful, necessary, best things than sliced bread, not sufficient. If I don't carry that 3 tiers into my classrooms, every teacher in your school has to look at his or her classroom and say, I have to have 3 tiers inside my classroom. Before kids ever leave my classroom, I've got to have 3 tiers. Do I have clear classroom rules? Are they taught? Are they implemented? Can kids count on, if it's a rule and they break the rule, something's going to be done about that? If they follow the rule, something's going to be done about that this is truly a rule? All right? How many of you have gone to the classrooms that say, raise your hand and wait to be called upon before you speak? Right? It's the most violated rule in the world. Right? I had that rule, and all of a sudden, Jill here throws out a great answer to a question. Didn't raise her hand, didn't wait for me to call on her. I'm probably not going to go, Jill, rule 4? I'm like, yes, great, okay? And then a little bit later over here, Tracy says something, I go, Tracy, what is rule 4? All right? And so you get this kind of inner, you know. The other issue is, again, do kids understand the rules? What are these rules? How do they apply? What makes sense? All this kind of stuff. Do I have good instruction? All that. Do I have differentiated instruction? I don't know how many times I will go in, and when I ask the paraprofessional or whoever, can this student do this work? The answer is no. Okay, and so the kid is supposed to sit there, and stuff is going way over their head. That doesn't make any sense, but it does to the other kids in the class. The problem isn't that I can't read, the problem is that all of you can. I do a workshop that deals with literacy kind of stuff, and one of the things I do is I throw about 9 of you documents that the letters are all screwed up. And so then I start calling on people, but I know who has the bad ones. Now the person who has the bad one thinks everybody's got a bad one, right? And so I call on Jill. Jill doesn't have a bad one. And Jill just starts reading. The person's going, how the hell is she doing that? I can't read this for nothing, all right? And then she's just rattling this off. And then I call on somebody else who can read it. And then I call on somebody who's got the bad one. And they start, and they sound very LD, right? And you can see all the other people who have the good ones going, shit, she's a teacher? She can't even read, all right? And it's to bring home the fact that the problem is that everybody else can and you can't, okay? And so if this is a student in my classroom, am I developing a lesson that truly gives them a seat on the bus? Can they play this game? Now, sometimes we do that by saying, Damien here's a paraprofessional, Jill's a student, we have a corner back there. And you go do your thing back there, right? And it has nothing to do with what the rest of us are doing, all right? Now, is that inclusion? No, the only thing they're sharing is air, okay? And precious little of that, probably, okay? So, again, you've got to be, now, that's tough. Differentiation is an easy word to say and a very, very, very difficult task to implement. We do not prepare our teachers to do this. I do a little dog and pony show with our elementary and secondary ed teachers, which is our university's belief is all they need for behavior management. And I will talk about differentiated. And up until about 2 years ago, they'd all look at me like, what? Especially the secondary ed people. Huh? And now at least they know the word. They still don't know necessarily how to do it. And that's a tough issue, all right? But do I have that? Am I thinking about that? That may be a big part of some of the prevention stuff. Especially if you're seeing kids who are engaged in escape and avoidance behavior. They can't do it. How many of you want to look stupid? I don't want to look stupid. right? Much better look bad, right? But then, even if I've got good rules, good instruction, all this kind of stuff, so I've got these great rules, you know, the problem I've got is I've got Carrie. And Carrie's got ADHD. You'll know never to sit in front again. You get here early for my workshops. You want to sit back there, okay? Carrie's got ADHD. Now, if Carrie comes into my classroom with ADHD, what characteristics does she bring in with her? Okay. Yeah, she's one of the things is she's easily distracted, right? Now we say, people can't. They attend well. They attend to everything, right? He's playing with his video camera back there, right? She's got a Coke. How the hell did she get a Coke, right? The rest of us are just drinking coffee. I want a Coke. Okay. All this stuff is now. It's not the fact that you want to make my Thursday difficult. The part of the brain that actually helps the student say all this stuff doesn't matter doesn't work real well. Okay? Now, you'll notice as we go through the day, I'm a little bit ADHD myself. Just a little, okay? Now, I've said this before, but like, I cannot watch basketball on TV. So now the Bulls are getting good again, right? You sit down to watch them. I'll sit down with my wife, and all of a sudden I'll turn to her and I'll say, how can you stand that? She says, what? The squeaking of those shoes. All that makes me crazy, right? And she looks at me and says, I didn't even hear it till you said something, Now she can hear it, okay? I can't filter that out. So it just makes me nuts, all right? Now, I'm not trying to be nuts, it just happens, okay? So those kind of, they will be impulsive, these kids with ADHD, right? So I might have this great rule that says, don't step on somebody else's speech. If they're talking, don't talk. Now, this kid can tell you, I'm not supposed to step on somebody's speech. I can even tell you what that means. I just can't do it, right? Because when an idea comes in my head, it goes out my mouth. Right? Now, do I have a system in my classroom to deal with it? I am going to have kids, in spite of their knowledge of the rule, in spite of their deep desire to follow the rule, can't do it. And do I have a system to address that? What's the most common system teachers use to address that? Set them out? Okay. That's probably the second most common. First most common is reprimand, right? Pay attention. Stop getting out of your seat. Listen. Raise your hand, right? Do you know who the most disruptive person is in most classrooms? The teacher. If you're actually in there taking data on disruption, and I actually do this sometimes. If I've got a teacher who's especially upset because this kid is disruptive, I will keep data on the kid and the teacher. And I will say, let's look and see who is the most disruptive. Okay? Well, I'm not trying to be popular. And I don't do it. Now, this is the other beauty of my job compared to your job. I get to go home. Right? I can come in and put this stuff down, and the teacher can go, rah! Right? And then I go, and bless you, and I hope this goes better, and I'm out of here, okay? You have to face the person the next day. That's true, okay? Part of what, and we'll see as we go through this, and some of you have seen this before, much of my data kind of looks like a picture almost. I use a lot of graph paper and when I talk to a teacher, I just kind of plop it down and say, here's what I saw. And I don't make any judgment on that until after we're discussing it, because most of the time the teacher is harder on them than I ever could be. They look at them, they kind of go, oh shit. I disrupted this class 116 times. Okay, this is probably not good. All right, this is probably not, I'm not putting this down on my resume. Okay? And it becomes an issue of saying, okay, now part of this issue is that you're trying to find ways to respond to a very common problem we have in classrooms, and that's that we're going to have this high rate behavior by a small number of kids. And nobody's ever talked to you about maybe we need a system to handle that. Okay? So one of the things that I would strongly urge you to think about is as you're working with your teachers, try to get them to build this 3-tier system in their classroom, because you will find you have to do far fewer FBAs and BIPs. All right? And then the top one is that you've got kids who have an FBA and a BIP, and how do I actually incorporate that into my classroom? So I've got this student with ADHD who really has a movement need. Okay, and so we'll pick on some people over here. Renee here needs to get up and move. She really does. So that's her desk, and this is her desk. And if she needs to move, this is how she can go, and I'm going to teach her the pathway she can. Now, she cannot bop somebody on the head as she passes by them, because that's not part of her disability. All right? But I'm going to work movement into it. I'm going to work the situation that if I've got a kid who needs lots of attention, they're going to need more space in the sun. So how are they going to get to respond more frequently than other kids? Because they need it. All right, how am I going to think about working that in? And again, you may have to help them do some of those kinds of things. But, so we're going to talk. Now, in that one packet of materials, we'll talk about a couple of things here that may just be a little bit helpful. If you turn to this page, this section that starts off, I think it's the second section in your material. So you've got this flow chart. So again, one of the things that I try to do is to work with my teachers to say, when do we really have to do a formal FBA and a BIP? Have we really done the things, move through the system? So it's going to look sort of like this sheet. Okay, I think it's a second packet of handouts that are, so go to the second after the first yellow sheet. Okay, so it's a sample tiered system. So that's just for your enjoyment. Okay, the second sheet, we've talked about this before, but just as a review, and I'll give it to you again. One of the things in terms of that differentiated instruction, if a student is on your caseload, now I actually ask elementary teachers to do this for every one of their students. So they would simply list all of their kids, and they would look at some of the key issues. What's this kid's decoding level? All right, so one of the things that I taught high school, I taught biology and math when I first started, then I ended up getting into behavior disorders, but I started with math and science. Now, if you go to most of your biology teachers, sophomore year biology teachers, do you think they know what the reading level is of their students in their classroom? Most of them haven't a clue. Do we have that information readily available? Yeah, now, especially since we're testing kids every time they turn around, we've got lots of data, okay? How do kids learn biology? How do biology teachers actually have kids learn biology? Read the biology book, okay? Most biology classes have more new vocabulary than the Foreign Language Academy recommends for a foreign language. Okay? And I've got a kid who can't even read the content. Does that mean he can't understand biology? No, it means he can't read it at that level. But if I don't know that, as the teacher, when you don't do the work, what do I assume? You're just a lazy kid that isn't doing the work. Now the kid's not going to say, excuse me, I did a readability on our material here. This is written at the 9th grade, 4th month. I read it the 6th grade, 3rd month. There's a bit of a discrepancy and I'm having a bit of a problem here. Okay? What does the kid say? Science sucks and you're a stupid ass, right? And what do we find ourselves doing? An FBA for what? Defiance. What's the problem? He can't read. Okay? So the issue becomes one of, do I know where my kids are and can I help my teachers understand where their kids are? And when I look at the material, say, this isn't going to work. How are we going to make this happen? Now, this was brought home, and I've probably told this story too. When I was an assistant professor starting out, I gave a presentation at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And it was on whether or not kids with disabilities could recognize whether other kids without disabilities wanted to play with them. Could they pick up the signals to understand that? And so they asked me to come out and do this presentation. And I mean, it's a 2-day workshop, and they were talking about training pilots to strafe. It was all Air Force stuff. It's like I'm kind of going, what the hell am I doing here, right? And there was a guy after me who gave a presentation on prairie dog barks when they see snakes. And at the end of the thing, we were both going, why'd they invite us? I still don't know why they invite us. But a guy came up afterwards and he said, I know what you were talking about. He says, when I was a kid, he says, I can't read. He says, I still can't read. When I was a kid, in order to get kind of into the social groups, he memorized all the statistics on baseball cards. So if you said Mickey Mantle 1965, he could tell you all of his stats. And he used that as his entree into being somebody that kids wanted to be around. He is the #2 man in this country in the field of transparent physics. He studies things that you can't see, like black holes. He can't read a word. Everything has to be on tape. Now, if my assumption was if you can't read, you're stupid, he'd have never gotten there. Okay? So it's not that he can't understand the content, he can't get the content the way we're presenting it. And again, we have to help teachers understand that, and that's a big part, especially if you're seeing kids who are avoiding and escaping. One of the big things that you should be looking at is Do I know where this kid's skill level is, his strengths, his weaknesses, and how does that play out in the demands of this course, in this class, in this classroom? Okay, so I've got this. Some of the next page has just a little quick and dirty check sheet for your FBAs and BIPs. We'll talk about that later today. The next ones, you're going to have something in this middle tier. Now, one of the empirically validated strategies is called the good behavior game. And it's basically where I break my class into 2 or 3 teams. And the teams basically, they can either compete with each other or they can compete with themselves from the previous day in terms of displaying desired behaviors. But what I've got is some way that I'm actually keeping track of what's going on so that kids begin to practice the right behaviors. And so you've got it kind of spelled out there in terms of ways to use the good behavior game. And we're not going to go through that, at least unless people want to later on. The next thing you have is, if I can find it, the right pages, is a group contingency. Now, I've talked about this before. I'm actually going to skip down a whole bunch of slides here. I frankly don't know how any teacher teaches in a classroom, a typical classroom, that doesn't have something like this in place. Without it, you're going to be doing just lots of verbal reprimand. But what you basically do is you identify what's my key behavior I'm concerned about. So let's say it's talkouts. And I keep track of, as a group, of talkouts. I got to move some stuff out of my pocket here. This is my big data collection system. I carry change. And I've shared this with people before, but I'm teaching. All of a sudden, as I'm teaching, Tracy here talks out. I do whatever I do and move a coin in my back pocket. A little bit later, Maureen talks out. Take a coin, move it to my back pocket. Do whatever I normally do. At the end of this is the 5th period. I count and I say, I have 9 coins. I do it again tomorrow. Say I had 6 coins. I do it the next day, I had 11 coins. On average, let's say it's about 9 times you guys talk out during the 5th period. I'm now going to put so many marks up. Now for little kids, up through about 4th grade, I like Velcro stars. Because I like the sound when you tear them off. And frankly, guys, you're going to need something because you're mad, right? Right? Okay. Now, I just simply put up so many marks. Now, if it was 9, I might put up 12 marks. Why would I put up 12 marks if the average was 9? And I'm going to remove one every time somebody talks out. I want kids to win. Anytime, now I've said this before, but I'll repeat it again as part of review. Anytime you want to change a kid's behavior using a positive intervention, they have to win over half the time with no change in their behavior. So you can't set this goal up here when you turn your homework in every day of the week. Curtain A opens, the Ferrari is yours. All right? Now the kid wants the Ferrari, but he's never turned his homework in every day of the week. How many times have you gone in this time of year and the teacher says, well, I've got this little star chart, and if they get so many stars, we have a party on Friday. And you go look at Ryan's name, and Ryan's got 3 stars, right? Everybody else has got 97. Right? That stopped being a reward system for Ryan about September 3rd. Okay? Because he can't get it. All right? So I've got 12 marks up here. All of a sudden, I should get everybody's name. And I should have a seating chart. That's what I need. Okay. Christina. Christina talks out. I don't have to say a word. I can just keep right on going. I come over here and I tear away one of these stars. Okay? I do that for every student. At the end of the period, if any stars remain, it means something good for the whole group. So I used to do the last 5 minutes of class. If there were any stars left, the last 5 minutes of class, put your books away. We're going to engage in a more fun activity. Now, I dealt with gang kids. I remember walking away sometimes thinking, I don't believe this shit works. I mean, these were some pretty